Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. They're wearing my face again. That's how the nightmare always starts. I'm back in Stillwater Cave, leading a tour group through the cathedral chamber when a cold draft brushes against my neck. I turn around and see myself, or something wearing my skin like an ill-fitting Halloween mask, standing at the back of the group. Its eyes are all wrong, too widely spaced, too deeply set. And that smile, stretched too far across a face that's mine, but not mine. The lights flicker, my headlamp dims, and suddenly I'm alone. The tour group vanishes, leaving me with my doppelganger in the vast darkness of the cave. It tilts its head at me, neck bending at an angle no human spine should allow, and speaks with my voice, only wrong, like it's being played backward and forward simultaneously. "Your turn to follow the rules, Ethan," it says, and lunges. I always wake up screaming, sheets soaked in sweat, the taste of limestone dust in my mouth. My name is Ethan Holbrook, and I've been a tour guide at Stillwater Cave in Edmonson County, Kentucky for the past 8 months. I came to the tiny town of Cedar Hollow, population 836, according to the weathered sign on Route 31W, running from something I couldn't outrun: grief. 2 years ago, my wife Melissa and our daughter Sophie died when their car slid off Quarry Road Bridge during a flash flood. I was working late at my accounting firm in Louisville, missing another dinner, another bedtime story, another chance to tell them I loved them. After the funeral, I couldn't bear our empty house with Sophie's finger paintings still stuck to the refrigerator and the half-finished renovation projects Melissa had been so excited about. I couldn't face the sympathetic looks from colleagues, couldn't stomach the corporate grind that had stolen so much of my time with them. So I sold everything, took a leave of absence, and ended up in Cedar Hollow, a place where nobody knew me or my story. I rented a small cabin off Possum Creek Road, the kind of place with unreliable internet and a porch swing that creaks in the wind. I thought I'd stay a month, clear my head. Then I met Jim Hatfield at the Stillwater Diner. Jim was 67, with hands gnarled from a lifetime working the caves, a face weathered like the limestone he guided people through. He needed help at Stillwater Cave, a smaller operation overshadowed by the nearby Mammoth Cave National Park. He got an honest face, he told me over Blackberry Cobbler. People trust an honest face in the dark. The job was simple enough. Led tourists through the mapped sections of Stillwater, recite the scripted facts about stalactites and stalagmites, collect the tickets, and make sure nobody wandered off the established path. The pay wasn't much, but my needs were few, and the rhythmic tranquility of the underground world offered solace my grief-stricken mind craved. Jim trained me for 2 weeks, showing me every passage, chamber, and formation. The cathedral with its 40-foot ceiling, the wishing pool with its crystal-clear water, the whispering corner where the cave's unique acoustics created eerie echoes. But on my final day of training, Jim took me aside in the guide's break room at the visitor center. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, illuminating the coffee-stained map of the cave system spread across the table. "There are rules to Stillwater that ain't in the employee handbook," he said, sliding a folded piece of paper across to me. His usually jovial face was deadly serious, eyes darting to the door, as if to ensure we were alone. "Memorize these. Follow them to the letter. Don't ask why. Just do it if you want to keep working here, and if you want to stay safe." I unfolded the paper to find a handwritten list. 7 rules. Looking back now, I wish I'd gotten in my car and driven as far from Cedar Hollow as possible. But I didn't. I laughed it off as local superstition, an initiation prank for the new guy. I should have taken the rules seriously from the start, because now I understand that in Stillwater Cave, the rules aren't just guidelines. They're the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. I remember the first time I broke one of the rules. It was 3 weeks after Jim handed me that list. 3 weeks of leading tours through Stillwater's winding passages, watching the wonder spread across visitors' faces as they gazed upon formations that had taken millennia to create. That morning had started like any other. I arrived at the visitor center at 7:30 a.m., a styrofoam cup of bitter coffee from Mabel's Gas and Grocery clutched in my hand. The center was a modest single-story building with wood paneling and displays of local cave artifacts, nothing like the slick operation at Mammoth Cave 15 miles away. Donna Reynolds was at the front desk, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, reading glasses perched on her nose as she counted ticket stubs from the previous day. She'd lived in Cedar Hollow all her 63 years and treated the cave with a reverence that bordered on religious. "Morning, Ethan," she said without looking up. "Got a school group coming in at 10, 5th graders from Brownsville Elementary." I nodded, heading to the break room to check the day's schedule. The rules Jim had given me were folded in my wallet, but I'd memorized them by heart. Never turn off your headlamp, even if a visitor asks you to show them true darkness. If you hear someone calling your name from an unmapped tunnel, ignore it. Count your group at the entrance, at the cathedral, at the wishing pool, and before exiting. If the numbers don't match, exit immediately with whoever remains. Never touch the water in the black pool, even if something falls in. If a visitor lags behind the group more than twice, they must be escorted out immediately. No tours after 5:17 p.m., regardless of circumstances. If you encounter another tour guide you don't recognize, end the tour and exit via the Eastern Passage only. I'd followed them diligently, though I still believed they were local superstitions that had calcified into tradition over the years. That changed on May 16th. I was leading the Brownsville Elementary kids through the main passage. Their teacher, Ms. Winters, a harried woman with kind eyes, tried to maintain order as 28 5th graders buzzed with excitement, their voices echoing off the limestone walls. One boy, freckle-faced and wearing a faded Kentucky Wildcats t-shirt, kept wandering away from the group. Cody Wilson. His mother worked at Stillwater Diner, made the best peach pie in 3 counties, according to the locals. "Cody," I called, keeping my voice light but firm. "Stay with the group, buddy. It's easy to get turned around in here." "But Mr. Holbrook," he protested, pointing down the narrow side passage. "I saw something shiny down there. As per protocol, I did a count. 28 children. 1 teacher, all accounted for." But Cody had now lagged behind twice, and Rule 5 was clear. The rational part of my brain argued that he was just an excited kid, not a safety risk. The passage he'd indicated was a dead end anyway, just a short corridor that had collapsed decades ago. What harm could come from letting him peek? "Just one quick look," Cody pleaded, his small flashlight already directed down the forbidden passage. I hesitated. The rest of the group was occupied, oohing and awing at a formation we called the Queen's Crown. Ms. Winters was busy answering questions. "All right," I conceded, breaking Rule 5. "But just for 30 seconds, and you stay where I can see you." Cody's face lit up brighter than his flashlight. He darted forward, and I followed close behind, keeping one eye on the main group. The side passage was cool and cramped, the ceiling low enough that I had to stoop. Cody's flashlight beam danced over the rough walls. "See? Nothing here," I said after a moment, putting my hand on his shoulder. "Let's head back." That's when I noticed it. The silence. The excited chatter of 27 other children and their teacher had completely vanished. It wasn't that they were far away or that the acoustics had changed. The sound was simply gone. I turned, pulling Cody behind me, and stared into the main passage. The group was still there, visible in the glow of the fixed pathway lights, but they moved oddly, too slowly, as if underwater. Ms. Winter's mouth was open mid-sentence, but no sound came out. "Mr. Holbrook?" Cody's voice wavered. "Why is everyone frozen?" Before I could answer, a new sound emerged from deeper in the side passage. A wet, sliding noise, like something heavy being dragged over damp stone. My headlamp flickered, and in that split second of darkness, the hairs on the back of my neck rose. Rule 1. Never turn off your headlamp. "We need to go, Cody. Now." I grabbed his hand, backing toward the main passage. The dragging sound grew louder, closer, and with it came a smell, dank and musty, but with an undertone of something rotten, like old meat left too long in summer heat. We stumbled back into the main passage, and instantly the sounds of the children rushed back, hitting us like a wave. Ms. Winters was still talking, pointing at the formation, unaware that anything had happened. I did another count. 28 children, 1 teacher. But Cody's hand trembled in mine, and when I looked down at him, his face was pale, eyes wide with an understanding beyond his years. "You heard it too, right?" he whispered. "And smelled it?" I nodded, unable to deny what we'd both experienced. "Mom says there are old things in these hills," he said, voice barely audible over the excited chatter of his classmates. "Things that ain't meant to be disturbed." I led the group out 20 minutes ahead of schedule that day, making up an excuse about maintenance work. I didn't report the incident. Who would believe me? But that night, I took out Jim's list and studied it with new respect. The rules, I realized, weren't superstition. They were a survival guide. After the incident with Cody, I became religious about following Jim's rules. For 3 months, I led tours without incident, navigating the twisted passages of Stillwater Cave with a newfound caution. I constantly checked my headlamp batteries, counted my groups obsessively, and never ever allowed stragglers. The nightmares persisted, though, my doppelganger appearing in different parts of the cave each time, wearing my face like a cheap mask that didn't quite fit. Sometimes it would be standing among the tour group, mimicking my movements. Other times it would be ahead on the path, waiting. Always with that wrong smile, that tilted head. I hadn't told Jim about what happened with Cody, or my dreams. Something held me back. Pride, maybe. Or the fear he'd think I wasn't cut out for the job. But one muggy July evening, as we closed up the visitor center, he noticed the dark circles under my eyes. "Cave's been talking to you, hasn't it?" he asked, his voice gentle as he sorted brochures behind the counter. I froze, a ring of keys dangling from my hand. "What do you mean?" Jim's weathered face creased with something between sympathy and resignation. "Stillwater speaks to everyone who guides her passages. Different ways for different folks. For me, it was smells that weren't there. My wife's perfume, tobacco from my daddy's pipe. For Hank before you, it was seeing his dead brother around every corner." A shiver ran down my spine despite the summer heat. "And what? What does it mean?" Jim shrugged, closing the brochure cabinet. "Means the cave's taken notice of you. Means you need to be extra careful with them rules I gave you." He paused, studying me. "Which one did you break?" The question caught me off guard. I didn't. "Don't lie to me, son. I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. I can see it in your eyes." I sighed, pocketing the keys. Rule 5. With a kid on a school tour. Nothing happened, really. just strange sounds, a bad smell. Time seemed to stop for a few seconds. Jim nodded, unsurprised. You got lucky. First offense is usually just a warning. He glanced at his watch. It's getting late. We should lock up. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for Jim's ancient Ford pickup and my Subaru. The sun was setting behind the tree line, painting the Kentucky hills in hues of orange and purple. In the distance, a whip-poor-will called, its melancholy song echoing across the valley. Want to grab a drink? Jim asked suddenly. Got some things you should know? 20 minutes later, we were seated in the back corner of the Rusty Nail, a dive bar just off Highway 259. The place was nearly empty on a Tuesday night, just a couple of locals shooting pool, and the bartender, Ray, a Vietnam vet who'd returned to Cedar Hollow after the war and never left. Jim ordered whiskey meat. I asked for the same, though I'd never developed a taste for it. The ritual felt important somehow. First thing you need to understand, Jim began after taking a sip, is that Stillwater isn't just a cave. Caves are just holes in the ground. Stillwater is something else. What do you mean? The locals, the old families who've been here since before the county was formed, they've always known there's something special about these hills. The Shawnee wouldn't come near this valley, called it the place where the skin stealers sleep. My hand tightened around my glass. Skin stealers? Jim nodded, his eyes distant. Creatures that look like people but ain't. They take faces, voices, memories too sometimes. The settlers who came later called them different things. Doppelgangers. Fetch. Not people. He took another drink. My granddaddy just called them the Hollow Ones. I thought of my nightmares, of the thing wearing my face. You're saying these Hollow Ones are real? Real as you and me. They live deep in the unmapped parts of Stillwater. Been there longer than people, probably. Jim leaned forward, lowering his voice though nobody was near enough to hear. The rules keep them at bay. Break the rules, you invite them in. But why do they want our faces? Jim finished for me. Who knows? To walk among us, maybe. To feed. To replace us. He shrugged. All I know is they're drawn to certain people. People with grief. The word hit me like a physical blow. Grief. The constant companion I brought with me to Cedar Hollow. The shadow that followed me into Stillwater's depths. They smell it on you, Jim continued, his voice heavy with certainty. That emptiness inside makes you interesting to them. I drained my whiskey, welcoming the burn. So what do I do? Follow the rules. All of them. All the time. And... He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Carry this. The pouch was old, the leather cracked and darkened with age. Inside was a mixture of dried herbs, small crystals, and what looked like animal teeth. My grandma's recipe, Jim explained, keeps them from getting in your head too much. Won't stop the dreams, but it'll keep them from taking root. I took the pouch, catching a whiff of something bitter and earthy. Thanks. Jim nodded, signaling Ray for another round. There's something else you should know. Rule 7. The one about other guides. That one's the most important. Why's that? Because they like to imitate. Most common way they try to get to you is by pretending to be someone you'd trust. Another guide is perfect. Someone who'd have reason to be in the cave. Someone you'd follow into places you shouldn't go. I remembered the last rule. If you encounter another tour guide you don't recognize, end the tour and exit via the Eastern Passage only. Why the Eastern Passage specifically? Jim's face darkened. Western and Northern passages take you deeper, closer to, wherever they come from. Eastern keeps you in the sunlight parts of the system. He downed his second whiskey. But enough of this talk. You know what you need to know now. We drove back in silence, the Kentucky night pressing in around us, alive with the sounds of cicadas and frogs. The hills loomed against the starlit sky, ancient and secretive. As I turned onto the dirt road leading to my cabin, my headlights caught something at the edge of the woods. A figure, standing perfectly still between two oak trees. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it was watching me, but when I slowed down, I realized it was just a deer, its eyes reflecting the light. I slept with Jim's pouch under my pillow that night. For the first time in months, I didn't dream of the thing wearing my face. Instead, I dreamed of Melissa and Sophie. Not of their deaths, but of a Sunday afternoon at Cherokee Park. Sunlight dappling through the trees as Sophie chased butterflies and Melissa laughed, her hand warm in mine. I woke with tears on my face, but feeling more rested than I had in a long time. That day, I led 2 tours through Stillwater without incident. I was hyper-vigilant, counting heads repeatedly, never allowing anyone to stray. As I guided the last group of the day, a family of 4 from Cincinnati, back toward the exit, the father asked why we had to leave at such a specific time. "Cave hours," I replied with a practiced smile. "We close at 5:17. "That's oddly specific," the mother remarked, checking her watch. "It was 4:58. I just shrugged, maintaining my guide's persona. Old tradition. What I didn't tell them was that I'd seen the shadows moving differently at dusk, stretching toward us like hungry fingers when the light began to fade. I didn't mention how the cave's whispers grew louder as that critical time approached. And I certainly didn't tell them about the figure I'd glimpsed earlier that day, standing in a side passage during my first tour, a figure that looked exactly like me, watching the group with hungry eyes before melting back into the darkness. The hollow ones were getting bolder, and somehow, I knew they were watching, waiting for me to break another rule. August in Kentucky brought suffocating humidity and afternoon thunderstorms that sent torrents of water down the hillsides into Stillwater's lower passages. The cave system was partially closed on rainy days, nature's way of enforcing Rule 4. Never touch the water in the Black Pool. The Black Pool wasn't on any official map of the cave. It wasn't part of the tour route, but Jim had shown it to me during my training, a perfectly circular body of water deep in the Western Passage. Unlike the crystal-clear wishing pool that tourists love to photograph, the Black Pool was opaque and still, its surface reflecting nothing, as if it absorbed all light that touched it. "That ain't regular water," Jim had told me, keeping a respectful distance. "Won't ripple, won't freeze, won't evaporate. And if the rains are heavy enough, it rises." August 17th brought the heaviest rainfall we'd seen all year. By mid-afternoon, the Weather Service issued flash flood warnings for Edmonson County. Jim called me at my cabin. "We're closing the cave," he said, his voice crackling over the poor connection. "Water's coming up in the lower chambers. I need to head to Bowling Green. My sister's having surgery. Can you go down and put up the closure signs?" Thunder rattled my windows as I agreed. I didn't relish the idea of being in the cave system alone, especially with all I now knew about the hollow ones. But I couldn't let Jim down. The drive to Stillwater was treacherous. Route 31W had standing water in several places, and twice I had to detour around fallen branches. The visitor center parking lot was empty when I arrived, the building dark. I unlocked the main entrance and grabbed a hard hat with a powerful headlamp from the equipment room. The closure signs were in the storage closet, laminated red placards that read, "Danger, cave closed due to flooding," in bold letters. The entrance to Stillwater was a wide stone arch reinforced with timber supports, leading to a gradually descending passage. As I stepped inside, the temperature dropped 20 degrees, and the sound of rain faded, replaced by the quiet drip of water from the ceiling. My footsteps echoed as I made my way to the fork, where tourists would normally choose between the shorter family route and the longer explorer's path. I placed signs at both junctions, securing them with the provided hooks. I was about to leave when I heard it. A voice, calling from deeper within the cave. "Help! Is someone there? Please." It was a man's voice, panicked and desperate. My first instinct was to respond, but Rule 2 flashed in my mind. If you hear someone calling your name from an unmapped tunnel, ignore it. But this voice wasn't calling my name, and it wasn't coming from an unmapped tunnel. It was echoing up from the family route, a perfectly documented passage. The rules didn't cover this situation, did they? "Hello?" I called back against my better judgment. "The cave is closed. Are you hurt?" "Thank God," the voice responded, relief evident. "I twisted my ankle. I can't walk. Please, I need help." I hesitated, thinking of Jim's warnings, of the moving shadows in my doppelganger. But what if this was a real person? Someone who had entered before the closure, perhaps, and gotten injured. Decision made, I headed down the family route, my headlamp cutting through the darkness. The passage was wider here, developed for tourism, with a level concrete path and safety railings where the drop-offs were steepest. "Keep talking so I can find you," I called. "Down here by the big column. Hurry, please. I think the water's rising." I recognized the landmark he mentioned, the Emperor. A massive column formed where a stalactite and stalagmite had joined, resembling a robed figure. It was about 10 minutes into the family route. As I approached, my light illuminated a man sitting against the cave wall, one leg stretched out awkwardly. He was middle-aged, wearing khaki hiking pants and a blue raincoat, his face pinched with pain. A small backpack sat beside him. "Thank you for coming," he said, relief washing over his features. "I thought I was going to be stuck down here all night." "The cave's closed due to flooding," I said, approaching cautiously. Something felt off, but I couldn't place what. "How did you get in here?" "I was already inside when the storm hit," he explained, gesturing to his ankle. "Slipped on some wet rock. I think it's just sprained, but I can't put weight on it." I knelt to examine his ankle. It was indeed swollen, the skin already bruising. "I'm Ethan, one of the guides. What's your name?" "David," he replied. "David Mitchell. I'm from Nashville, just up for the weekend." I nodded, still feeling uneasy. "Let me help you up. We need to get out before the water rises further." He gripped my offered hand, and I pulled him to his feet. Or tried to. Despite his average build, he felt impossibly heavy, as if his body had the density of stone. "Sorry," he grimaced, adjusting his position. "Let me try again." This time, he came up more easily, leaning on me for support. His body pressed against mine was cold, much colder than it should have been, even in the cave's chilled air. "My pack," he said, pointing. "Can't leave it." I grabbed the backpack with my free hand. It was surprisingly light, as if empty. We began the slow journey back toward the entrance, David limping heavily beside me. The sound of water was louder now, a constant rushing from deeper in the system. "So, you work here full-time?" David asked, his voice conversational despite his apparent pain. "About 8 months now," I replied, trying to focus on the path ahead. The concrete was slick with moisture, treacherous in the limited light. "Must get lonely in these caves," he continued. "Ever see anything strange down here?" The question sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cave's temperature. "Strange how?" David shrugged, his shoulder moving against mine. You know how these old places get reputations. Heard some stories in town about things that aren't quite natural. My grip on him tightened involuntarily. Just tourist nonsense. Is it? His voice had changed subtly, a new cadence creeping in. Because the folks at the Stillwater Diner seemed mighty convinced, especially old Mabel Fisher. She had quite a tale about her great-grandfather disappearing in these caves. Said he came out 3 days later, but he wasn't quite right anymore. Wasn't quite himself. I stopped walking, the hairs on my neck rising. I never mentioned where I worked. How did you know it was Stillwater Cave? David went perfectly still against me. You told me you were a guide here. I said I was a guide. I never said where. I turned to look at him directly, my headlamp illuminating his face. His eyes reflected the light oddly, like an animal's. And Mabel Fisher died 2 years ago. There's no Mabel at the diner. For 3 heartbeats, neither of us moved. Then David smiled. A smile that stretched too wide for a human face, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp. Smart boy, he said, but the voice was different now. Deeper, with an accent I couldn't place, certainly not from Nashville. Most don't catch on so quick. I released him and stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the wet stone. David, or whatever was pretending to be David, remained upright, showing no sign of his supposedly injured ankle. "What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. The thing wearing David's shape tilted its head at an impossible angle, neck bending almost 90 degrees. Curious little guide, aren't you? Always asking questions. What are the rules for? Why the Eastern Passage? What are the hollow ones? It mimicked my voice perfectly with each question. My blood ran cold. It had been listening to my conversations with Jim. You've been following the rules so well, it continued, taking a step toward me, its movements fluid despite its awkwardly bent neck. It's disappointing, really. We were so looking forward to having you join us. I backed away, keeping my headlamp trained on it. The light seemed to disturb it. Its features flickered subtly, like a television with poor reception. Jim warned me about you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You can't touch me if I follow the rules. It laughed, a sound like water gurgling through a drain. Poor Ethan. Jim didn't tell you everything. The rules don't protect you. They protect everyone else from what's down here, from us. My back hit the cave wall. I'd run out of room to retreat. And you just broke Rule 2, it hissed, grinning that too wide grin. You heard a voice calling, and you came running. So helpful, so human. Realization dawned on me with horrifying clarity. The rule wasn't about hearing my name specifically. It was about responding to any voice calling from the cave. But I started. Rules are rules. It shrugged, now just feet away. Jim is very specific about them for a reason. You broke one. That means we get to play. My mind raced. I needed to get to the Eastern Passage, but I was deep in the family route with this thing between me and the main junction. Then I remembered something. A maintenance tunnel that connected the family route to the Eastern Passage. It was narrow, used by staff to access electrical panels, and it was somewhere nearby. The creature took another step toward me. Its form seemed less stable now, David's features melting like wax, revealing something underneath that my mind couldn't quite process. I can smell your fear, it said, sniffing the air. Smells like grief, like loss. We've tasted your dreams even. We know about Melissa, about little Sophie. The mention of my family's names galvanized me. I lunged sideways, spotting the narrow maintenance access door partially hidden behind a natural rock formation. The creature swiped at me, its hand no longer human, but something elongated and clawed. It caught my jacket, tearing through the fabric, but missing my skin. I yanked the door open and squeezed through, slamming it behind me. There was no lock, but the passage was so narrow that the creature, at least in its current form, couldn't follow. I heard it scratching at the door as I stumbled forward into the darkness, my headlamp the only illumination in the claustrophobic tunnel. "We'll be waiting, Ethan." Its voice penetrated the door, echoing in the confined space. "We have all the time in the world, and now that you've broken the rules, we can taste you." I ran through the maintenance tunnel, heart pounding, Jim's leather pouch a reassuring weight in my pocket. The creature's words echoed in my mind. "The rules don't protect you. They protect everyone else." I had a sickening feeling that I'd only begun to understand the true nature of Stillwater Cave and the darkness that dwelled within its depths. I emerged from the maintenance tunnel into the eastern passage, gasping for breath, my headlamp flickering ominously. The batteries were running low, a rookie mistake I wouldn't have made under normal circumstances. I always checked my equipment before entering Stillwater. The eastern passage was the oldest developed section of the cave, with rough-hewn steps and iron handrails installed by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. It led almost directly to the surface, rising steadily along a natural fault line in the limestone. Safety, if I could reach it. Behind me I heard movement in the tunnel, a slithering, dragging sound that raised goosebumps on my arms. Whatever David had become was trying to follow. I pushed forward, my boots slipping on the damp stone steps. The passage narrowed in places, forcing me to turn sideways to squeeze through, the rough limestone scraping against my back. My breath came in ragged gasps, echoing in the confined space. A sound made me freeze. From somewhere up ahead, voices, human voices. A tour group. Impossible. I'd closed the cave myself. "Hello?" A familiar voice called. "Is someone down there?" My blood turned to ice. It was my voice. I pressed myself against the wall, extinguishing my headlamp. Rule 7 echoed in my mind. If you encounter another tour guide you don't recognize, end the tour and exit via the eastern passage only. But I was already in the eastern passage, and the guide was between me and the exit. In the darkness, I fumbled for Jim's leather pouch, clutching it like a lifeline. The mixture inside rustled faintly as I removed it from my pocket. Without thinking, I untied the drawstring and emptied some of the contents into my palm. Dried herbs, small crystals, and what I now could identify as teeth. Animal teeth from different species. Acting on instinct, I put a pinch of the mixture under my tongue as Jim's grandmother might have done with her remedies. The taste was bitter and earthy, with an underlying sweetness like dried berries. A curious warmth spread from my tongue throughout my body, and with it, a strange clarity. The panic receded, replaced by a focused calm. "I know you're there, Ethan," my own voice called from up ahead, closer now. "Don't be afraid. I'm here to help you understand." Footsteps approached, unhurried, confident. I remained still, barely breathing. "The rules are a cage, you know," the voice continued conversationally. "They keep you bound, limited. There's so much more to this place than Jim has told you. So much power in these depths." A beam of light swept over the passage not 20 feet from where I hid, illuminating the rough walls and the droplets of water that clung to the ceiling like stars in a stone sky. And then I saw it, my doppelganger, wearing my face and clothes, carrying a guide's headlamp identical to mine. But something was different. The mixture under my tongue seemed to sharpen my vision, and I could see how its edges blurred slightly, how its movements were too smooth, too perfect. "I can give you what you want most," it said, stopping to sweep its light across the passage again. I've seen inside your mind, Ethan. I know you want them back. Melissa, Sophie. I can make that happen. My heart constricted at the mention of their names, but the clarity from Jim's mixture remained. This thing couldn't bring back my family. It was trying to manipulate me, using my grief as a weapon. They don't have to be gone, it continued, its voice softening to match the tender tone I used when speaking of them. Time works differently in the deeper chambers. Reality is flexible. They're waiting for you, Ethan. I can take you to them. For a brief, terrible moment, I wanted to believe it. To step into the light and follow this thing wearing my face, if there was even the slightest chance of seeing Melissa and Sophie again. The creature took another step forward, its beam of light falling just short of my hiding place. Don't you want to see them again? Hold them? Tell them all the things you never got to say? Something wasn't right. Beyond the obvious wrongness of a creature impersonating me, something about its offer rang false. Jim's mixture was clearing my thinking even further, and a memory surfaced, something the real David, or whatever it was, had said before revealing itself. We were so looking forward to having you join us. Join them. Not reunite me with my family. Make me one of them. I remained silent, pressing deeper into the shadows. The doppelganger sighed, my sigh perfectly replicated. I thought you were smarter than this, it said, its tone hardening. Do you think Jim tells you everything? Do you think he hasn't made his own deals with us? Why do you think he's lasted so long in this place? That gave me pause. Jim had been running still water for decades. How had he survived all that time around these creatures? He sacrifices others to save himself, the thing wherein my face said, as if reading my thoughts. Brings in outsiders like you, people with grief and loss, the flavors we prefer. He gives us a taste now and then to keep us satisfied. I didn't want to believe it. Jim had been nothing but kind to me. He'd given me the rule list, the protective pouch. The rules keep you trapped in the pattern, it continued. Keep you predictable, controllable. Break free, Ethan. I can show you the true still water. The light swept closer, and I held my breath. Last chance, my voice called out, but different now, an undercurrent of something ancient and cold beneath the familiar tones. Come willingly, or we take you anyway. But I promise, you won't like our methods. I had to make a decision. The exit was up ahead, past the creature. The only other option was to retreat deeper into the cave, away from safety. But then I remembered what Jim had said about the black pool rising during heavy rains. An idea formed, desperate and dangerous, but perhaps my only chance. I turned and ran back the way I had come, toward the maintenance tunnel, toward the family route, deeper into still water. Foolish guide! The thing shrieked behind me, its voice no longer mine but something shrill and inhuman. Running into our embrace. I didn't look back, focusing only on the path ahead illuminated by my weakening headlamp. I burst through the maintenance door and back into the family route, then took a sharp left at the Emperor column. The rushing sound of water was louder now. The storm must have intensified above ground, sending more rainwater flooding into the cave system. I splashed through puddles that hadn't been there before, following the downward slope of the passage. I needed to find Jim's office, a small room carved out of the rock near the junction of the family and explorer routes. If my suspicions were correct, he would have answers there, information he hadn't shared with me. Behind me, I heard multiple sets of footsteps, not just my doppelganger, but others joining the hunt. The hollow ones were converging. I reached the junction and spotted the unmarked door that led to Jim's private office. It was locked, as expected, but I knew where he kept the spare key, inside a fake rock next to the doorframe, a security measure so obvious it was almost insulting. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door and slipped inside, locking it behind me. It wouldn't hold them for long, but I needed just a few minutes. Jim's office was small and cluttered, filing cabinets against one wall, a desk covered in papers, maps of the cave system pinned to a corkboard. A battery-powered lantern sat on the desk, which I immediately switched on to conserve my headlamp. I began searching frantically through the papers on his desk. Most were mundane: maintenance schedules, tourism receipts, supply orders. But underneath the stack of brochures, I found a leather-bound journal, its cover worn with age. I opened it to find handwritten entries dating back decades, Jim's private log of Stillwater. I flipped to a random page from 1987. Third guide this year. They're getting hungrier. The rules hold them back, but each time someone breaks one, their power grows. Thompson lasted only 2 months before he answered that damned calling from the Western Deep. Nothing I could do for him after that. His replacement starts next week. No family, history of depression. Perfect candidate according to the old agreement. My stomach churned as I read, flipping through more entries. Jim hadn't been protecting me. He'd been grooming me as a potential sacrifice. Someone with grief, no close family ties, unlikely to be missed. A loud thud against the door jolted me from my reading. They had found me. "Ethan!" Jim's voice called from the other side. Not my voice this time, but a perfect imitation of my mentor. "Let me help you, son. You're confused." I ignored it, frantically scanning the journal for anything useful. Near the back, I found a detailed map of Stillwater, far more comprehensive than the tourist version. It showed passages I'd never seen, chambers without names, and deep in the western section, a large chamber marked simply, "Their domain, never enter." Next to it was the black pool, and connecting them, a narrow tunnel labeled "Feeding Path." Another thud against the door, harder this time. The hinges creaked ominously. "We're coming in, Ethan," the voice said, no longer bothering to sound like Jim, but something ancient and hungry. "And we're going to wear your skin for 100 years. The door began to splinter as I tore the map from the journal and stuffed it in my pocket alongside Jim's pouch. There was no time to read more, but I'd learned enough. Jim wasn't my friend. The rules weren't protection. They were a feeding schedule. And I had just broken another one by entering a staff area alone during an emergency. The hollow ones weren't just hunting me anymore. They were closing in for the kill. The door exploded inward with a crash that echoed through the small office. I dove behind Jim's desk as splinters of wood rained down. Through the settling dust, a figure stepped into the room, not my doppelganger, not David, but something worse. It wore Jim's face. "There you are," it said, Jim's familiar weathered features twisting into an expression my mentor had never worn, hunger mixed with cruel amusement. "Finding things you shouldn't be reading, Ethan?" I scrambled backward until I hit the wall, knocking over a filing cabinet in the process. Papers scattered across the floor as the thing wearing Jim's appearance stepped further into the room. Behind it, shadows moved in the doorway. More of them, waiting. "I've got to hand it to the real Jim," it continued, glancing around the cluttered office. "He's a shrewd businessman, trading one outsider every few years to keep the rest of Cedar Hollow safe. The locals know, of course. Not the details, but they understand the arrangement. Why do you think no one gets too friendly with the new guides?" My mind raced. There had to be a way out. The office was small, with just the one door now blocked by the creature. But cave systems often had. I looked up. There, partially hidden by acoustic ceiling tiles, was the outline of a maintenance hatch, likely connecting to the ventilation system that ran throughout the developed parts of the cave. "You won't make it to the surface," the gym thing said, following my gaze. "The others are already waiting at every exit. But don't worry. If you come quietly, we'll make it quick. Well, relatively quick." It chuckled, the sound all wrong coming from Jim's mouth. I had to keep it talking while I looked for a way to reach the hatch. Why me? Why not just take Jim years ago? Jim has an arrangement. Family legacy, you might say. His grandfather made the original deal back in 1893. Protection for the town in exchange for occasional offerings. It shrugged Jim's shoulders. "Nothing personal, Ethan. You're just convenient, grieving, isolated, easily manipulated. Perfect vessel material." Vessel? The word sent a chill through me. We can't just take anyone. The grief has to be fresh, the loss profound, creates the right texture. It licked Jim's lips, an obscenely long tongue sliding out. "Your pain over Melissa and Sophie is exquisite, aged to perfection these past 2 years." As it spoke, I was edging toward the desk where the battery lantern sat. If I could just reach it. "Once we wear you, we can walk in the sunlight for a while, live among the humans, feed on their grief too, until the vessel expires and we need a new one." My hand closed around the lantern's handle. "And the rules. What's their purpose?" "Insurance policy." It smiled with Jim's face. "Make the offerings last longer. Keep them from stumbling into our domain too quickly." Jim's ancestors were clever. They made the rules specific enough to protect most visitors, while guaranteeing that eventually, someone like you would break one. A controlled feeding schedule. In one swift motion, I hurled the lantern at the creature's face. It connected with a sickening crunch, and Jim's features distorted like wax under a flame. The thing shrieked, a sound no human throat could produce, as I leapt onto the desk and shoved aside the ceiling tile. The maintenance hatch was there, just as I'd hoped. I pulled myself up with desperate strength, squeezing into the narrow ventilation shaft as clawed hands grabbed at my legs. My jeans tore, skin burning as talons raked my calf, but I kicked free and scrambled deeper into the dark shaft. It was tight, barely wider than my shoulders, but I forced myself forward on elbows and knees. My headlamp provided minimal illumination, the batteries nearly spent. Behind me, I heard thumping and screeching as something tried to follow. The shaft branched in several directions. I pulled out the map I'd taken from Jim's office, trying to orient myself. If I was above his office, then the shaft should connect to there. The explorer's path, which eventually led to the Western Passage and the Black Pool. I took a right turn, moving as quickly as the confined space allowed. The metal of the shaft was cold against my skin, and in places, damp with condensation. The sounds of pursuit faded slightly, but I didn't slow down. After what felt like an eternity of crawling through darkness, I reached another vent opening. Through the slats, I could see a wider passage below. The explorer's path, recognizable by its distinctive rock formations. I kicked out the vent cover and dropped through, landing painfully on the hard-packed earth floor. My headlamp flickered once, twice, then died completely. I was plunged into absolute darkness. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm me. Then I remembered the small emergency flashlight I kept in my back pocket. Standard procedure for guides, though rarely needed with the main lighting systems and headlamps. I fumbled for it, fingers trembling, and switched it on. The beam was narrow but bright, cutting through the blackness. I checked the map again, orienting myself. The Black Pool was deeper in the Western Passage, beyond a formation we called the Sentinel, a tall, thin stalagmite that resembled a hooded figure. As I moved forward, the sound of rushing water grew louder. The heavy rains were definitely causing flooding in the lower chambers. Water trickled down the walls and gathered in depressions on the floor. In places, I had to wade through ankle-deep pools that hadn't been there during my previous visits. I reached the sentinel and paused, catching my breath. According to the map, I needed to take the narrow passage to the left, one that wasn't part of the standard tour routes. It looked uninviting, tight and twisting, with rough walls that would scrape against anyone trying to pass. A distant howl echoed through the cave, inhuman and filled with rage. They were still hunting me. I squeezed into the narrow passage, moving sideways where it was too tight to proceed normally. The rough limestone tore at my clothes and scraped my skin, but I pressed on. The passage descended at a steep angle, forcing me to brace against both walls to avoid falling. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes, the passage widened into a large, roughly circular chamber. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the ceiling, giving the impression of infinite darkness above. And there it was. The black pool. It sat in the center of the chamber, a perfect circle about 20 feet in diameter. Unlike normal cave pools, there was no shore, no gradual deepening, just a sharply defined edge where solid stone met liquid darkness. The surface was unnaturally still, reflecting nothing, not even my flashlight beam, which seemed to be absorbed by the inky blackness. I approached cautiously, remembering Rule 4. Never touch the water in the black pool, even if something falls in. The air here was different, heavier, with an ozone smell like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. The temperature was warmer too, despite being deeper underground. According to Jim's map, on the far side of this chamber was the tunnel marked Feeding Path, the entrance to their domain. The place they took the guides who broke the rules. I shone my flashlight around the chamber, looking for that tunnel, and froze. My beam had caught a glimpse of something pale, half hidden, behind a cluster of stalagmites. I moved closer, dread pooling in my stomach. It was a pile of clothing, tour guide uniforms, hiking gear, everyday clothes, all neatly folded and stacked. Dozens of outfits spanning what looked like decades of fashion. Next to the clothes were personal effects, watches, wallets, jewelry, all arranged with disturbing precision. I picked up a wallet from the top of the nearest pile. The driver's license inside belonged to Marcus Thompson, the guide Jim had mentioned in his journal entry from 1987. There were others. Elaine Woodson, 2001. Carlos Reyes, 2009. Brigitte Meller, 2016. Jim's sacrifices, all left here, their possessions discarded like insect husks after the hollow ones had taken what they really wanted. A small splash from the direction of the pool made me whirl around, flashlight raised. The surface of the black pool was moving, not with the gentle ripples of disturbed water, but with deliberate, sinuous patterns, as if something large was shifting just beneath the surface. Then slowly, something began to emerge from the center of the pool. At first, I thought it was a person, a human head and shoulders rising from the blackness. But as more of it appeared, I realized with horror that it was multiple people, or rather, parts of people, fused together in an impossible patchwork. I recognized some of the faces from the IBs I'd just seen. Marcus, Elaine, Carlos, others I didn't know. All somehow incorporated into a single, massive entity. And then I saw Jim's face among them, eyes closed as if sleeping, half absorbed into the grotesque collection. The real Jim had never left for Bowling Green. He'd never had a sister with surgery. The hollow ones had already taken him, adding him to their collective. The thing that had been wearing his face in the office was just a projection, a puppet. The amalgamation of faces and limbs rose further from the pool, water, if it was water, sliding off it like oil. When it spoke, it was with a chorus of voices, Jim's among them. The vessel returns to us, they said in terrible unison. The grieving one comes willingly to the feeding place. I backed away, my heel catching on the rocky floor. I stumbled, nearly dropping my flashlight. We have waited for you, Ethan Holbrook, the voices continued. Your grief is a beacon, your pain a delicacy. More splashing sounds came from behind me. I spun to see dark, viscous liquid bubbling up from cracks in the chamber floor. The black pool was spreading, cutting off my escape route. The grotesque collective continued to rise from the pool, revealing more of its impossible form. Dozens of partial bodies melded together in a column that seemed to extend endlessly into the depths below. Arms reached out from the mass, grasping at the air in my direction. You have broken 3 rules now, the voices said. The contract is fulfilled. Your flesh is forfeit. Despite my terror, something clicked in my mind. Contracts had terms. Rules had purposes. There was a system here, a pattern I was missing. I frantically reviewed what I knew. Jim's family had made an arrangement with these beings. The rules were designed to eventually be broken, ensuring a steady supply of sacrifices while protecting most visitors. What if there was a way to turn their system against them? The rising mass was nearly fully emerged now, its composite bodies dripping with black liquid. I could see Jim clearly among them, his face twisted in an expression of frozen agony. That's when I spotted it. On the far side of the chamber, partially hidden by stalagmites, a narrow crack in the wall. According to Jim's map, that had to be the feeding path, the entrance to their domain. In that moment, a desperate plan formed. If I could reach that passage. The entity from the pool was moving toward me now, a horrific sculpture of fused humanity pulling itself across the chamber floor with dozens of arms. Behind me, the black liquid continued to rise from the cracks, already covering my shoes. I had one chance. I aimed my flashlight at the mass of faces, focusing the beam on Jim's incorporated visage. I know about the contract, I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. I know the terms of the arrangement your kind made with the Hatfield family. The thing paused, Jim's face twitching within the mass, eyes still closed. You need the rules to be broken willingly, I continued, a theory forming as I spoke. That's why you can't just take everyone who enters the cave. There has to be a violation, freely chosen. The chorus of voices spoke again, but now with uncertainty. The vessel understands little. The contract is ancient, the terms immutable. Then I propose a new contract, I said, an idea crystallizing. Me for them, all of them. I gestured toward the amalgamation. Release the others, take me instead. The thing tilted its massive, multifaceted head, considering. Why would we agree? We already have claim to you. Because I'm offering something more valuable, willing sacrifice, no broken rules, no trickery, a pure offering. The massive bodies rippled, faces shifting as if conferring with each other. Jim's face rose higher in the collective, his eyes opening for the first time. But they weren't his eyes. They were black voids, reflecting nothing. Approach the pool vessel, the chorus commanded. Make your offering formal. I stepped forward, moving carefully around the spreading black liquid, keeping as much distance as possible from the amorphous horror that had emerged. I reached the edge of the black pool, its perfect circular boundary still intact despite the chaos around it. The thing watched me, Jim's face now prominent among the others, those void-like eyes fixed on mine. I knew what I had to do, and I knew I'd only get one chance. I stood at the edge of the black pool, my reflection absent from its perfect obsidian surface. The amalgamation of bodies waited expectantly, Jim's void-filled eyes watching me with ancient patience. The black liquid continued to seep from the floor around us, but it avoided the pathway to the feeding path tunnel, as if deliberately leaving me an escape route I wasn't meant to take. "State your terms, vessel," the chorus of voices commanded. My mind raced. I needed to buy time, to get closer to that tunnel entrance while making them believe I was surrendering. "I want to understand first," I said, taking a small step to the right, circling the pool toward the tunnel. "What happens to them after you?" "Take them." I gestured at the fused mass of people. The thing rippled, faces shifting positions within its incomprehensible anatomy. They become us. We become them. Separation is an illusion your kind clings to. And Jim? His family made the original contract. Why take him now? "The lineage ended," the chorus replied. "No children to continue the arrangement. The final Hatfield became payment." I took another subtle step toward the tunnel. "So you need someone new to maintain the contract? To bring you offerings?" The mass pulsed, something like consideration passing through its collective features. "Perhaps. The system has functioned adequately for generations." I was starting to understand. The Hatfields had been sending guides to their deaths for over a century, maintaining a gruesome balance with these creatures. With Jim gone, they needed a new caretaker. "What if I took Jim's place?" I suggested, continuing my careful movement around the pool's edge. "I could bring you offerings, maintain the rules, continue the arrangement." Jim's face twisted within the mass, his void eyes narrowing. "Deception," the chorus hissed. "We taste your thoughts, grieving one. You seek escape, not service." Damn. They could sense my intentions. I needed a new approach. I reached into my pocket and gripped Jim's leather pouch. It was still half full of the mixture he'd given me. The herbs and crystals had helped clear my mind before. Maybe they could do more. "No deception," I said, slowly withdrawing the pouch. "Just a token of my commitment. A binding offering." Before they could react, I upended the pouch, spilling its contents directly into the black pool. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The pool's surface erupted like a struck hornet's nest, geysers of black liquid shooting toward the ceiling. A shriek of agony emanated from the amalgamation, the chorus of voices fracturing into individual screams. Jim's leather pouch hadn't just been for protection. It was a weapon, specifically crafted to harm these entities. I didn't wait to see more. I bolted for the tunnel entrance, splashing through the spreading black liquid that now seemed to be retreating back into the cracks in the floor. Behind me, the chamber filled with unearthly howls as the amalgamation thrashed in apparent agony. The feeding path tunnel was low and narrow, forcing me to crouch as I ran. Unlike the developed passages of Stillwater, this was raw, untouched cave. No concrete paths, no safety railings, just jagged limestone that glittered ominously in my flashlight beam. The tunnel sloped downward at a steep angle. In places, I had to slide down near vertical drops, catching myself on rocky outcroppings to avoid plummeting into the darkness below. My palms were shredded, knees bruised, but fear drove me onward. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit grew. Not the wet slithering of the amalgamation, but something worse. Dozens of individual footsteps. They had separated, returning to their stolen forms to hunt me down. The tunnel suddenly opened into a vast chamber unlike anything I had seen in Stillwater before. My flashlight couldn't illuminate its full extent, but what I could see froze my blood. The chamber floor was covered with a carpet of human remains. Not whole skeletons, but fragments. Thousands of scattered bones, yellowed with age, stretching into the darkness. Among them lay more recent remnants, scraps of clothing, shoes, personal items spanning decades. This was their true domain. the graveyard of everyone who had broken the rules over generations. I picked my way carefully through the bone field, trying not to disturb anything. The air here was stagnant, carrying a musty, ancient smell that caught in my throat. The only sounds were the distant drip of water and my own ragged breathing. My flashlight beam caught something ahead, a raised platform of sorts, crafted from what appeared to be fused bone and stone. Upon it sat a stone basin filled with the same black liquid from the pool, and carved into the wall behind it was a series of symbols. Not English, not any language I recognized, but somehow readable to me. The herbs from Jim's pouch must have done more than I realized, granting me temporary insight into this place. It was the contract, the original agreement between the Hatfields and the Hollow Ones, transcribed in this ancient script. I approached cautiously, scanning the symbols. They detailed the terms: protection for the town of Cedar Hollow in exchange for regular offerings. The Hatfields would maintain the rules, ensuring a steady but controlled supply of outsiders who would break them. In return, the Hollow Ones would not venture beyond Stillwater's boundaries. But there was more. A final clause, one that Jim might never have known about. Should the lineage end, or should one come who thrice breaks the rules yet reaches the sacred chamber, a new covenant may be forged. Blood is the ink, will is the power. A new covenant, a way to rewrite the terms. The sounds of pursuit grew louder. They had found the tunnel and were closing in. I had minutes at most. I turned back to the bonestone altar with the basin of black liquid. Next to it lay a primitive knife, its handle fashioned from antler, its blade from what looked like flint. Blood is the ink. I understood what I had to do. I picked up the knife, testing its edge with my thumb, still sharp after who knew how many centuries. The first of the pursuers emerged from the tunnel entrance, the thing that had worn David's face, though it had abandoned any pretense of humanity now. Its form shifted constantly, features melting and reforming like wax under a flame. The vessel cannot rewrite what was written, it snarled, its voice guttural and wrong. The contract is eternal. The contract says otherwise, I replied, raising the knife. Blood is the ink, will is the power. More of them poured into the chamber, twisted versions of Jim, of myself, of people I didn't recognize. They spread out, encircling me, cutting off any escape. With no time left to hesitate, I sliced my palm with the flint knife. Blood welled immediately, bright red against my skin. I held my hand over the basin, letting the blood drip into the black liquid. I offer my blood freely, I declared, the words coming to me as if I'd always known them. I am Ethan Holbrook, and I propose a new covenant. The black liquid in the basin began to swirl, my blood not mixing with it but floating on the surface in intricate, impossible patterns. The creatures halted their advance, watching with what appeared to be trepidation. The one wearing David's features spoke again, its voice now layered with others. Speak your terms, vessel, but know that once sealed in blood, they bind us all. I took a deep breath. Everything depended on getting this right. First, all those you have taken will be released, their bodies restored, their spirits freed. The creatures hissed collectively, but didn't interrupt. Second, you will remain within the boundaries of Stillwater Cave, never to venture into the human world above. More angry murmurs, but still they listened. Third, you will take no more unwilling sacrifices. Only those who enter your domain with full knowledge and consent may be claimed. The David thing stepped forward, its form still fluid, but settling into something more stable. And what do we receive in this covenant? Why should we accept these terms? This was the moment I had been preparing for. the true gamble. In return, I will ensure you receive one willing sacrifice each year, someone who chooses to come to you, understanding the price. I paused, steadying my voice, beginning with myself. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the soft plip of my blood continuing to drip into the basin. "You would give yourself willingly?" the creature asked, genuine surprise in its inhuman voice. "Yes," I answered, "but only after you've fulfilled your part of the covenant. Release those you've taken, including Jim Hatfield. Return them to their human forms. Then I am yours." The creatures conferred among themselves in hissing, clicking sounds no human throat could produce. Finally, the David thing turned back to me. "We accept these terms, with one modification. We keep the Hatfield male. Too much of him is already part of us to be fully separated." I hesitated. Could I sacrifice Jim to save everyone else? But then I remembered his journal, the decades of guides he'd sent to their deaths. Perhaps this was justice of a sort. "Agreed," I said finally, "but all others must be freed." "It is done," the creature declared, approaching the basin. It extended what approximated a hand, dipping a finger-like appendage into the mixture of my blood and the black liquid. Then it pressed that finger to my forehead. Pain exploded behind my eyes, white-hot and all-consuming. I saw visions of the cave as it had been through millennia, of the ancient Native Americans who had first discovered these creatures, of the early settlers making their bargains, of countless sacrifices over centuries. And I saw the truth of what the Hollow Ones were. Not demons or monsters in the traditional sense, but something older, something that existed in the spaces between reality. They fed on grief and identity because these were the most concentrated forms of human experience, the essence of consciousness they craved, but could never naturally possess. When the pain subsided, I found myself on my knees before the basin. Around the chamber, the creatures had retreated to the shadows, watching. "The covenant is sealed," the David thing said. "When the next full moon touches the waters of the Black Pool, we will come for you, Ethan Holbrook. Until then, we will honor our agreement." I staggered to my feet, dizzy from blood loss and the psychic assault of the sealing ritual. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" "We are bound by the same forces that bind reality itself," it replied. "The covenant cannot be broken once sealed in willing blood." As if to demonstrate, the chamber began to tremble. From the bone-covered floor, misty forms started to rise. Dozens of them, human-shaped but insubstantial. They solidified gradually, revealing men and women in various states of dress from different eras, the spirits of those taken by the Hollow Ones over generations. They looked disoriented, confused, as if awakening from a long nightmare. Some reached out to me with expressions of gratitude or disbelief. "They will find their way to the surface," the David thing explained. "Their physical forms await them there." I nodded, too exhausted to speak further. I had succeeded in freeing them, but at what cost? In 1 month, when the full moon rose, I would return to this chamber to fulfill my end of the bargain. "Go now," the creature said, gesturing toward a passage I hadn't noticed before. "That way leads to the surface. We will see you again soon, Covenant Maker." The spirits of the freed captives were already drifting toward the indicated passage. With no other choice, I followed them, leaving behind the bone-strewn chamber and the creatures that would eventually claim me. As I walked, I wondered if I had made the right choice. 1 month of freedom in exchange for eternity with the Hollow Ones. But the alternative had been unthinkable, allowing them to continue taking innocent people for generations to come. At least now, the rules would be clear. No more unwitting sacrifices, no more deception. I had 1 month to prepare, 1 month to set my affairs in order, 1 month of humanity left to me. 29 days. That's how long I had before the full moon would rise and shine upon the black pool. 29 days of borrowed time. The passage the Hollow Ones had directed me toward spiraled upward through previously unknown sections of still water. I followed the procession of freed spirits, their forms growing more solid as we ascended. None spoke, whether they couldn't or simply have nothing to say after their ordeal. I didn't know. We emerged, not through the visitor center entrance, but from a narrow fissure in the hillside, about a half-mile from the main cave opening. It was night, the storm having passed, leaving behind a clear sky filled with stars and a waning gibbous moon. The spirits dispersed across the landscape, heading in different directions as if drawn to something I couldn't perceive. Within minutes, I was alone, standing in the damp Kentucky night with only my dying flashlight and the weight of my bargain. My cabin on Possum Creek Road was a 40-minute walk from where I stood. As I trudged through the wet underbrush, my mind struggled to process everything that had happened. I had met creatures older than human civilization, creatures that fed on grief and identity. I had struck a deal with them, offering myself in exchange for the freedom of countless others. And I had 29 days to live as Ethan Holbrook before becoming something else entirely. I arrived at my cabin as dawn was breaking. The simple structure looked exactly as I'd left it. Porch swing creaking in the gentle morning breeze, my battered Subaru parked out front. Inside, nothing had changed. The dirty coffee mug from yesterday morning still sat by the sink. The book I'd been reading remained splayed open on the couch, waiting for me to return to its pages. The normalcy was jarring after what I'd experienced. I half expected to find my doppelganger sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for me with that wrong smile. I showered, watching as rust-colored water swirled down the drain. Dirt, blood, and whatever residue the black pool had left on me. The cut on my palm stung under the hot water. When I examined it afterward, I noticed something strange. Rather than the clean line the flint knife should have left, the wound had healed into an intricate pattern, like a sigil etched into my skin. The mark of the covenant. I slept most of that day, my body and mind exhausted beyond measure. When I woke, it was dark again, and someone was knocking on my door. I approached cautiously, grabbing a kitchen knife before checking the peephole. It was Donna Reynolds from the visitor center, her lined face tight with concern. "Ethan, are you in there? We've been worried sick." I opened the door, keeping the knife hidden behind me. She looked like Donna, no weird eyes, no too wide smile. Just an elderly woman with genuine concern etched across her features. "Thank the Lord," she exclaimed, then called over her shoulder, "He's here." I found him. 2 men came hurrying up the porch steps, Sheriff Marcus Dale and Reverend Thomas Powell from the Cedar Hollow Baptist Church. The sheriff looked me up and down, noting my disheveled appearance and the bandage I'd wrapped around my cut palm. "Where the hell have you been, son?" he asked, his gruff voice masking relief. "We've had search parties out since yesterday afternoon when Jim called saying you were missing." I froze. Jim called? The 3 exchanged glances. "Well, sure," Donna said. "Called from his sister's place in Bowling Green. Said you were supposed to close up the cave but never checked in. Can I speak with Jim?" More concerned looks. "That's the other strange thing," Reverend Powell said gently. "We've been trying to reach him since last night, but his sister says he never arrived. His truck was found abandoned at the Cave City gas station." The implications hit me like a physical blow. The Hollow Ones had released those they'd fully consumed, the disembodied spirits I'd seen, but had kept Jim, claiming he was too integrated with them to separate. Now they were using what remained of him to cover their tracks, calling to report me missing while simultaneously disappearing himself. "Ethan?" Sheriff Dale was studying me intently. "You okay, son?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." More than one, I thought. "I'm fine," I lied. "Got lost in the back passages during the storm. The flooding was worse than I expected. Took me a while to find a way out." They didn't believe me. That was clear from their expressions. But they didn't press the issue. "Well, you're safe now," Donna said, patting my arm. "That's what matters. The cave's closed for repairs anyway after all that rain damage." "When will it reopen?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't be there to see it. "Couple weeks, maybe," Sheriff Dale replied. "Engineers need to check the structural integrity first. Standard procedure after flooding. 2 weeks. Half of my remaining time. After they left, extracting a promise that I'd come by the station tomorrow to file a formal report. I sat on my porch swing watching the night deepen around me. Crickets chirped in the tall grass. A barred owl called from the forest edge. The ordinary sounds of a Kentucky night, unchanged by my encounter with ancient horrors. The next days passed in a surreal haze. I gave my statement to Sheriff Dale, sticking to my story about getting lost during the flooding. I helped with cleanup at the visitor center, where muddy water had indeed seeped in during the storm, providing convenient cover for any other damage the Hollow Ones might have caused. Jim remained missing. A statewide alert went out, but no one had any leads. His sister confirmed he'd called to say he was on his way, but never arrived. His truck at the Cave City gas station showed no signs of foul play. It was as if he'd simply vanished, which, in a way, he had. I wondered how much the locals truly knew. Donna, Reverend Powell, Sheriff Dale, they had grown up here, descendants of families who had lived in Cedar Hollow for generations. How much of the arrangement with the Hollow Ones was communal knowledge, passed down in whispers and cautionary tales. 2 weeks after my bargain, Stillwater Cave reopened to the public. A temporary guide named Sarah was brought in from Mammoth Cave National Park to lead tours while the search for Jim continued. I worked the front desk, selling tickets and answering tourist questions. I avoided entering the cave itself, not out of fear exactly, but a sense that I was no longer welcome in its depths until my covenant came due. Sarah found me in the break room one afternoon, staring at the coffee-stained map of the cave system, the sanitized version, showing only the tourist-approved sections. "The caves talk to you yet?" she asked casually, pouring herself a cup from the ancient percolator. I looked up sharply. "What?" She shrugged. "Family's been guiding at Mammoth for 3 generations. Caves talk to everyone who spends enough time underground. Different for each person, but they always make contact eventually." I studied her, mid-30s with sun-weathered skin and keen eyes. Nothing in her demeanor suggested knowledge of the Hollow Ones specifically, but her words held the weight of someone who understood there was more to these Kentucky caves than limestone and water. "What do they say to you?" I asked carefully, mostly in my grandmother's voice. Sarah sipped her coffee. She was the first female guide at Mammoth back in the 60s. Died before I was born, but in the echo chamber, I can hear her clear as day. She paused, giving me a shrewd look. "Jim hurt his father, I think." "We talked about it once, after a guide convention in Louisville. Said his dad showed him all the secret places." I nodded, unsure how to respond. How much did she know? How much was safe to say? "People go missing in caves," she continued, her tone deliberately casual. "Nature of the beast. Folks from the city don't understand the dark, don't respect it." "And locals do?" She smiled faintly. "Locals make arrangements." Before I could question her further, Donna poked her head in, announcing a busload of tourists from Nashville. The moment was lost as Sarah headed out to greet them, leaving me with the unsettling certainty that the people of Cedar Hollow knew far more than they let on. As the full moon approached, I began putting my affairs in order. I had no family to notify, few possessions to distribute. I wrote a letter explaining my disappearance as a decision to move on after Jim's unsolved case, suggesting I needed a fresh start elsewhere. I left it addressed to Sheriff Dale on my kitchen table. I donated most of my clothes to the church thrift store. I paid my rent 2 months in advance to give my landlord time to find a new tenant. I left my car keys with a note gifting the Subaru to Donna, who had been talking about replacing her aging Honda. On the morning of the full moon, I hiked to Cherokee Park in Louisville, a 3-hour drive from Cedar Hollow. It was the last place I'd been truly happy with Melissa and Sophie, that sunny Sunday I'd dreamed about after using Jim's protective pouch. I sat on the same bench where we'd eaten ice cream, watching children play on the same playground where Sophie had chased butterflies. I didn't cry. I'd made my peace with their loss, or as much peace as anyone can make with such grief. The Hollow ones had been drawn to that grief, but in facing them, I'd somehow processed a portion of it. Not healed, not forgotten, but integrated, like the mark on my palm that pulsed faintly in time with my heartbeat. As the sun set, I drove back to Edmonson County, to Stillwater Cave. The visitor center was closed, the parking lot empty. I used my key to enter, walking through the darkened building to the equipment room where I collected a fresh headlamp and extra batteries. I didn't take the main entrance. Instead, I hiked around to the fissure where I'd emerged with the freed spirits nearly a month ago. It was harder to find from the outside, but the mark on my palm seemed to warm as I approached, guiding me. The narrow opening was just as I remembered, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. I switched on my headlamp and entered, descending into the darkness that would soon become my eternal home. The passage was easier to navigate this time, as if the cave itself was guiding me toward my destination. I emerged eventually into the bone-strewn chamber where I'd made my covenant. It was empty of the Hollow ones, but I knew they were watching, waiting. I approached the basin where I'd sealed the bargain with my blood. The black liquid within it was still, reflecting the stone ceiling above. I checked my watch. 11:47 p.m. In minutes, the full moon would rise over the hills of Kentucky. Its light would filter through some unknown opening to touch the waters of the Black Pool, and the Hollow ones would come to claim their willing sacrifice. I sat on the edge of the bone-stone altar and waited, remembering Melissa's laugh, Sophie's small hand in mine, the life I'd had and lost and somehow, improbably, made meaningful again through its end. As the chamber gradually brightened with silvery moonlight, I heard them approaching, the soft, wet sounds of the Hollow ones returning to their domain. I stood to meet them, unafraid. The disappearance of Ethan Holbrook barely made the local news. A brief mention in the Edmonson County Herald, sandwiched between coverage of the high school football team's victory and announcements for the upcoming autumn festival. Another outsider who had come to Cedar Hollow and eventually moved on. His letter to Sheriff Dale was accepted without question. His car, now Donna's, remained in the visitor center parking lot. His cabin was rented out to a graduate student from Western Kentucky University doing research on cave ecosystems. Life in Cedar Hollow continued as it had for generations. 3 months after Ethan vanished, Stillwater Cave hired a new head guide, a soft-spoken man in his mid-30s named Alan Foster. He had experience from commercial caves in Tennessee, references that checked out, and an earnest demeanor that tourists found reassuring in the darkness underground. If anyone noticed that Alan sometimes tilted his head at odd angles when thinking, or that his smile occasionally stretched just a fraction too wide. They didn't mention it. If Donna Reynolds observed that Alan's handwriting bore a striking resemblance to Ethan's, she kept it to herself. If Reverend Powell recognized something familiar in Alan's eyes during Sunday services, he simply nodded and moved on. The first thing Alan did upon taking the position was to rewrite the employee handbook, adding a special section for guides. 7 rules, to be memorized and followed without exception. On quiet nights when the cave was closed to visitors, Alan could sometimes be seen hiking around to the far side of the ridge, to a narrow fissure hidden among the trees. He would disappear for hours, returning before dawn with a peaceful expression. Once a year, when the full moon of late summer rose, Alan would select a special candidate from among the seasonal employees or particularly troubled visitors, someone with fresh grief, someone isolated, someone who wouldn't be immediately missed. He would take them on a private tour of Stillwater's exclusive passages from which they never returned. Their disappearances were always explained away. A hasty departure from town, a decision to move on, a note left behind, perfectly forged. And in the deepest chamber of Stillwater, the Hollow Ones thrived on their annual sacrifice, keeping their covenant with the new master of bargains. Inside the collective consciousness that had once been Ethan Holbrook, fragments of his humanity remained. Memories of Melissa and Sophie. Echoes of compassion. The lingering sense of having done something noble despite its terrible cost. These fragments were enough to ensure the covenant was upheld, the bargain maintained, one willing sacrifice each year, rather than dozens of unwitting victims. In the black pool, if one looked at precisely the right moment when moonlight touched its surface, one might glimpse faces in its depths. Jim Hatfield, each of his ancestors, and Ethan Holbrook among them. Neither fully consumed nor truly gone, they existed in the space between, maintaining the ancient balance between the world above and the darkness below. The rules protect everyone but the guide. If you visit Stillwater Cave in rural Kentucky, you might meet Alan Foster. He'll lead you through the cathedral chamber, show you the wishing pool, tell you facts about stalactites and stalagmites in his soft, pleasant voice. But if you notice his smile stretching just a bit too wide, if his head tilts at an angle that makes your skin crawl, if he watches you with unusual intensity when you linger behind the group, follow the rules. Stay with the tour, keep your headlamp on, don't touch the water, and never, ever answer if you hear someone calling your name from the darkness. Because in Stillwater Cave, the rules aren't just guidelines. They're the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. For now.